What if Iroh had mentored Azula? It's one of the biggest what-ifs in Avatar: The Last Airbender. A fan-favorite question, and one that hits way deeper than people give it credit for. I mean, we saw what Iroh did for Zuko. He turned a rage-fueled, honor-obsessed exile into one of the most balanced and emotionally grounded characters in the entire show. So naturally, the thought follows. If he saved Zuko, couldn't he have saved Azula too? And it's not just theory bait. People want this to be true. We love Iroh. We want Azula to be saved. We see her suffering, her breakdown, her isolation, that final haunting scene with the mirror, and we need it to mean something. We want someone to show up. We want her to be rescued. But here's the tragic truth. Iroh couldn't have saved Azula. Not because he didn't care, not because she was beyond redemption, but because what Azula needed was something Iroh could never give her. So let's look at how Iroh helped Zuko. Not in a superficial way, like he trained him to firebend better, but what he really gave him. First of all, time. Zuko was allowed to break down. He was allowed to fail, to betray, regret, spiral, and start over. Iroh didn't push him toward healing. He waited. He was patient. He showed up over and over, even when Zuko slammed the door in his face. Zuko had space to fall apart without being thrown away. And that's huge, because most people, especially kids raised like Zuko, are taught that love is conditional. The second thing is that, to Zuko, he was a presence without correction. He didn't fix Zuko. He didn't give lectures or orders. He sat with him, offered tea, listened. And when he did speak, it wasn't to mold Zuko into a better prince. It was to help him realize he didn't need the throne at all. He gave Zuko something bigger than revenge. He gave him an identity beyond honor. And third, maybe most importantly, Zuko wanted out. That's the crack Iroh reached through. For all his rage and entitlement, Zuko was never at peace with the Fire Nation's values. His conscience was loud, even when he ignored it. He was always torn between pleasing his father and doing what felt right. Azula didn't have that tier. Azula was brilliant, focused, disciplined, and completely sure of who she was. That's what made her terrifying. Zuko was confused. Azula was certain. She didn't struggle with doubt, she was rewarded for suppressing it. While Zuko was punished for failing to live up to Ozai's expectations, Azula was praised for exceeding them. She didn't lose her way. She walked the path the Fire Nation laid out perfectly. And that's exactly what broke her. Azula's identity wasn't a mask, it was armor. And it worked, right up until it didn't. She was taught that love was weakness, that vulnerability was a liability, that trust gets you hurt. So she became untouchable, a prodigy, a weapon. But what she needed was the opposite. She needed space to question who she was, a chance to ask, what if I'm more than this? She needed permission to be imperfect, to lose a fight, to be emotional, to cry without being discarded. She needed relationships built on trust, not performance. And here's the catch. To even receive those things, Azula would have had to admit that her entire worldview was wrong. That everything she was taught by her father, her tutors, her nation was a lie. You can't save someone who thinks they're already winning. Now you might think, but Iroh could have shown her love, right? He did it for Zuko. Why not for her? But here's the thing. Iroh was part of the world that created her. He was a general. He led a siege on Ba Sing Se, the same city Azula later conquered. He was part of the military machine that raised her. Even if he changed later, Azula wouldn't have seen a kind old uncle. She'd have seen a failure, a traitor, someone who let the war end. And let's be honest, even if Iroh offered her tea and wisdom and hugs, Azula wouldn't have trusted it. She was trained to see compassion as manipulation. That's how her mother's love was weaponized against her. That's how she saw Ty Lee and Mai's betrayal, not as a choice, but as weakness. Even Iroh's kindness would have felt like a trick. Now, here's where we have to talk about trauma attachment theory and the psychology of control. Azula didn't just mistrust love, she replaced it with dominance. Her entire emotional framework was built around the idea that safety only exists when she is in control. That's why she excels at manipulation, strategy, intimidation. Those aren't just skills, they're coping mechanisms. To let Iroh in would mean letting go of that control. And for someone like Azula, raised in an emotionally dangerous environment, vulnerability isn't healing, it's a threat. Psychologically, children who grow up in high-control, low-empathy environments often develop what's called avoidant attachment. They learn that depending on others leads to disappointment or danger. So they build an identity around invulnerability. That was Azula, and that's the wall Iroh could never climb. Because his greatest tool, patience, warmth, open affection, would have landed as either weakness or manipulation. Worse, Iroh reminded her of the thing she hated most, uncertainty. He represented a path with no clear rules, no measurable success. He didn't give commands or ranks. He gave silence and reflection. Azula wasn't built to sit in ambiguity. She was built to dominate it. Iroh could love. He could guide, he could wait. But he couldn't undo Azula's world from the outside. She would have had to come to him. And she never did. To circle back a bit, Azula wasn't a tragic exception. She wasn't a mistake. She was the perfect outcome of a broken system. Ozai didn't just abuse her, he built her. He took a brilliant, emotionally sensitive girl and turned her into a weapon. Every time she was cruel, she was rewarded. Every time she showed vulnerability, she was punished. And it wasn't just Ozai. The Fire Nation as a whole reinforced this. Domination, control, fear. These weren't flaws. They were virtues. Azula was a success story. She was everything her nation wanted her to be. So if someone like Iroh came along and said, "There's another way," she would have had to betray every part of herself, everything she had ever been praised for, just to listen. That's not redemption. That's annihilation. What Azula needed wasn't advice. It wasn't training. It wasn't even love, not on its own. She needed a world where love wasn't a liability. And that world never existed for her. Zuko was saved because he could fall. He lost everything, and that gave him space to rebuild. His failure created the opening Iroh needed. Azula, she couldn't lose. Not until it was too late. Not until she was hallucinating, sobbing, cutting her own hair. Her breakdown wasn't a villain's downfall. It was her first honest moment. And by then, no one was left to catch her. So what if Iroh had mentored her? It wouldn't have been enough, because what Azula needed wasn't a mentor. She needed a revolution. A world where power wasn't her only value. A world where trust wasn't a threat. A world where love didn't have to be earned. And that world never came. If you are into hyper-analyzing shows or games, and are like mythology, feel free to check out my channel and hit that beautiful subscribe button.